Imagine that you're in your favorite restaurant having a meal with some of your friends. As you are all enjoying your food, one of your friends suddenly says, "Hey, wasn't there something funny that happened to us here before?" And then everyone starts talking about how the waiter spilled coffee on one of them, leaving coffee stains on their clothes, or how they were all shocked when someone proposed to their partner right at that same table. But this is news to you. None of those things happened because they were never there. The memory you all share is a false one. Welcome to the next episode of Crash Course Psychology, where today we'll be learning about memory. Memory is essential to our survival. We need it to learn from our experiences and then use that knowledge to navigate similar situations in the future. So you might think that the memories we hold are reliable and accurate, but that may not always be the case. Sometimes we forget things that should stick in our minds, and sometimes we remember things that never even happened. Now that doesn't mean that memory is useless. On the contrary, forgetting things can also help us. In the past, psychologists believed that forgetting was simply the result of decay. Just like a physical thing rusts over time, our memories fade away if we don't use them. But now we know that forgetting can actually be a very intentional process. For example, you probably remember the details of your first date pretty well, because you had plenty of opportunities to rehearse telling the story. But do you remember every single thing that happened? Probably not. Maybe you can't recall what you had for lunch or who sat across from you, and that's okay. Most people can only remember about half of what they experience in any given day. And it turns out that this selective forgetting can actually be a good thing. In 1977, researchers Daniel Gilbert and Susan K. Burras proposed that we have an almost subconscious way of deciding which memories to keep and which to forget. They call this the monitoring process. This monitoring process helps us decide which memories to keep and which ones to forget. Like when we meet someone new, we don't remember everything about them. Our monitoring process filters out information we deem irrelevant and focuses on the important stuff so we can get to know them better. If we couldn't filter out extraneous details, we wouldn't be able to function in daily life. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone while every unimportant detail of their appearance flashed into your mind. It would be overwhelming and exhausting. So the monitoring process protects us by helping us focus on the relevant details. It also helps us avoid being overwhelmed by the amount of information we take in every day. But sometimes the monitoring process works a little too well, causing us to selectively forget important information. For example, let's say you notice that your partner has gained a few pounds recently. Maybe you're thinking about mentioning it, but you decide against it because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You may even find yourself forgetting that detail until you see them in a bathing suit, at which point you feel betrayed by their body and the unfairness of the situation. We don't tend to remember the things we try to forget, so the monitoring process can protect us from some uncomfortable truths, but it can also shield us from important information that we need to know. However, there is another process that can make sure we remember important things: the rehearsal process. This is the process where we consciously bring memories back into our minds and place them into working memory, which is essentially just our brain's way of saying, "Hey, pay attention to this." By rehearsing a memory, we make sure that it is encoded in our long-term memory and that it will be available to us in the future. That's why we repeat passwords to ourselves when we retry to memorize them or write down important dates and numbers. By actively rehearsing information, we ensure that we won't forget it later. Unfortunately, sometimes we intentionally put things out of our minds, such as traumatic experiences. But remembering these events is important to work through them and move forward. So even though our brains naturally block painful memories, we can try to recover them through therapy or guided meditation. Rehearsing memories isn't always a conscious process though. Let's go back to that dinner with friends. Remember how none of you knew about the coffee spill or the proposal? Well, maybe you do now. That's because hearing about the memory caused you to reconstruct it and fill in the blanks with whatever you felt must have happened. And that's where false memories come into play. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted an experiment in 1974 that showed just how easy it is to implant false memories. She showed participants a series of car crash photos and then asked them questions about what they saw. One of the questions was, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Even though none of the photos showed the cars smashing into each other, the participants answered the question with a higher estimate than those who were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Even more surprisingly, when the participants were asked about the broken glass on the cars, which was not mentioned in the original photos, those who heard the word smashed were more likely to report seeing broken glass. Simply changing the wording of a question could alter the memory participants had of the event. This is important because eyewitness testimony is often unreliable. In fact, Loftus's research was inspired by a real case where a woman named Susan E. Smith claimed that she was kidnapped by two men while getting gas at a station. Her story was widely reported, and her sketch of the men was shown across the country. Eventually, Smith was convicted of killing her own son and making up the kidnapping. When Loftus interviewed Smith, she realized that the details of the story were fuzzy. Smith had been watching TV while getting gas and did unsee the license plate of the car that pulled up behind her, but she told the police that she had seen it and they had taken it down. Later, when Loftus asked Smith if she remembered the exact color of the car, Smith said no. "I just know it was a car." These kinds of faulty memories can have serious consequences. So how do we know if we have a false memory? The answer may surprise you. Neuroscientist Dr. Brian Levine of the University of California, San Diego, says that false memories look and feel just as real as true memories. There's no special feeling that comes over you when you're remembering something that didn't happen. This means that you can't trust your gut feeling of knowing when a memory is true. Instead, you have to evaluate the source of the memory. For example, ask yourself, did I hear this information from a credible source, or was it reported in a reliable publication? If the source is questionable, then the memory may not be true. False memories can also be constructed from our own imagination. It's not uncommon for people to claim that they remember events that never happened, like witnessing a crime or being in a certain place at a certain time. But when asked for more details, their stories fall apart. Psychologist Dr. Richard Harris of Duke University says that these false memories are usually unintentional. People aren't lying. They truly believe that they have the memory. However, there are rare cases of intentionally planted false memories. This happens when someone convinces another person that something did happen when it really didn't. One study found that children were more susceptible to adult suggestions of false memories than teenagers and adults. When adults suggested false events to children and then asked them to remember as much as they could about the event, they added details that weren't part of the original story. Meanwhile, teenagers and adults were better at recognizing when information was not theirs to remember and were less likely to accept a false memory. Unfortunately though, false memories can cause serious harm. False memories may be the reason why 25% of people believe that they were sexually abused as children, even though they were never actually abused. In these cases, memories were most likely suggested by a therapist trying to help the patient. Despite the potential damage that can come from false memories, psychologist Dr. Jeremy R.M. Gray of the University of Bristol says that they can also be beneficial. For example, believing that you helped an elderly person cross the street when you really just witnessed it can inspire you to do the same thing in the future. And if everyone has a few false memories of doing good things under their belt, the world would be a better place. Thanks for watching this episode of Crash Course Psychology, which was filmed at a studio and made in partnership with a digital studio in nature. You want to help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever? You can join our community on a crowdfunding platform.